स्टूडेंट्स। आप लोग मेरी आवाज सुन सकते हैं?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So today we are going to discuss what is an argument in logic. Generally, if you remember, we have been talking about logic is the study of those methods and principles which govern our reasoning, which distinguish between correct reasoning and incorrect reasoning. And in this context, the last lecture we discussed was about proposition. And propositions, if you remember, they are the building blocks of an argument. So today we are going to discuss what does argument mean, basically, what is an argument? And this is the key concept around which all of the course of Introduction to Logic revolves around. So the outline for today's lecture is what is an argument? Why do we need to argue? And how we construct or we present our arguments. So let's begin with the definition of an argument. An argument is a structured group of propositions which reflect an inference. In order to understand argument, first we need to understand what the proposition is. And if you recall the last lecture in which we discussed that all propositions are sentences, but all sentences are not propositions. So the propositions are only those sentences which assert or deny something. And that is the key, because without proposition, we cannot construct an argument. So the first thing we need to understand is about proposition. These are those statements which assert or deny something, and they are declarative. They have a subject and a predicate, and the act of comparing the two is called a judgment. So in a proposition, we basically pass a judgment. For example, if I say, this chair is brown, so I am asserting something about the chair. The chair is a class of objects, and brownness is another class of colors. So we are basically trying to compare these two and make a judgment about the chair, that the chair basically possesses the qualities of brownness. And similarly, if we the proposition in negative form, if we deny something about something, if I say uh, he is not tall or Mr. X is not tall, so basically I am trying to describe the height of Mr. X, and I am trying to negate about his tallness. So the subject is Mr. X and the predicate is tall. So the two classes, comparing of two classes is called a proposition when we pass a judgment. That is a proposition. So the first thing, the key or the building block of an argument is proposition. So without proposition, we cannot construct an argument. Now, the second thing is, the first thing we talked about, argument is a structured group of propositions. So we know now what proposition is. Now, another key thing which we need to understand is the structured group. So the first thing in this phrase is the group. That basically means that argument is the group of propositions, which means a single proposition can never be an argument. In order to be an argument, there must be at least two propositions, more than one, because a single proposition can never be an argument. So it's a group of propositions, which means at least two, minimum two propositions, and maximum you could go on and on. Now the structured group basically means, right, what is meant by structured group? As I said that a single proposition can never be an argument. That means there must be more than one argument. So if there are at least two propositions, that would compose an argument. And the two propositions are, in those two propositions, there is one conclusion and the other proposition would be premise. Now the premise or the premises are those propositions which support the conclusion. And conclusion is basically that proposition which is trying to prove something. I repeat, premises are those propositions which basically support the conclusion. And conclusion is that particular proposition in which we are trying to make a point. For example, if I say all students are intelligent, this is a premise. And then I say Mr. X is a student, that is the second premise. And then we draw conclusion on the basis of these two premises, which basically means therefore Mr. X is intelligent. The first premise proves that all the class of all students and the class of intelligence, they have basically we compare these two classes and we assert that all the class of students is consisted in the class of intelligence. So all the students are intelligent. That basically means that if anyone is a student, he or she must be intelligent. This is the first premise. The second premise says that Mr. X is a student. We are asserting something about Mr. X and we are saying that he is a student. Now, the first two premises, all students are intelligent and Mr. X is a student. When we combine these two, we draw the conclusion that because all students are intelligent and Mr. X is a student, therefore Mr. X is intelligent. Because we have asserted that whoever is a student, he or she must be intelligent, and because Mr. X is a student, therefore the conclusion says that Mr. X is intelligent. So this is the simplest form of an argument, or even this argument has three propositions. Another example of two proposition argument, I would say that because the teacher is not coming today, therefore we will not have a class. We don't have a class. So the first proposition says it gives the reason because the teacher is not coming, and then it declares it draws the conclusion that because teacher is not there, therefore there won't be a class. So an argument must have at least two propositions, one premise and one conclusion. Premise could be more than one, it could be 5, 10, 20, whatever. The more premises you have, the more stronger conclusion you would have. But at least one premise and one conclusion. So we basically covered now an argument is a structured group of proposition. Structured means the first thing it must consist on propositions. The second thing is group of propositions means more than one proposition, and the third thing is it must have a structure, and a structure says that it must have a premise and conclusion. Now, the order of this structure is not necessarily that there is always a premise prior to conclusion. Sometimes we have conclusion and then after that we present premises. For example, there is no class today because the teacher is not coming. So the second proposition is the premise, while the first one is the conclusion. So order does not matter. What matters is it must have a structure, it must have at least one such proposition which is trying to prove something and the other proposition in that support. So a structured group of proposition which reflect an inference. Now another thing is the key, but before going to the inference, I would like to highlight some key terms, the indicators which could show that what proposition is premise and the which one is conclusion. So all those propositions, but not necessarily limited to these. These are the key indicators, but not limited to these indicators. There might be more, but these are just simply the example. The conclusion indicators are therefore, thus, hence, consequently, ergo, so, etc., etc. And the premise indicators are because, because the teacher is not coming, therefore there will not be a class. Since the teacher is not coming, thus there is no class. Or supposing that teacher is not coming, there is no class. Assuming that, given that all these kind of terms when used in a proposition, these are the premise indicators, while these terms they indicate that this proposition is a conclusion. Now, the key after discussing the structured group of propositions, now the next thing we need to understand is the inference. What is the inference? The inference is a process of link between the propositions. One proposition supports other. With the help of this link, another proposition is drawn. It plays the role of cement in an argument. If you remember, I told you that propositions are the building blocks of an argument. So they play the role of building blocks or bricks, and then it is a structured group of propositions. An argument does not mean that we have collection of propositions. Just mere collection of propositions does not mean that it's an argument. It's the same thing when we collect so many bricks. When we collect bricks and we collect blocks and we just dump them somewhere, we cannot call it a wall. In order to become a wall, we must have some structure in these bricks. So we put these bricks. Only the first thing is a single brick cannot be a wall. Second thing is it's a group of bricks which becomes a wall, but that group must have a structure. So we have to lay these bricks in a given structure, and then what basically links these bricks or joins these bricks together, that is cement or any other element you want to put in a wall. So just collecting a single brick cannot be a wall. Just mere collection of bricks cannot be a wall. It must have a structure. So you have to put these bricks in an order, and then it must have cement in those, because just mere collection of bricks and putting them in an order, still it is not considered a wall until and unless you put cement or something to join these bricks or blocks together, then it will become wall. Now, in similarly in the argument, we have proposition, more than one proposition. We have structure, premise, and conclusion. But if it does not have inference, if it does not have link, then still it won't be called an argument, or maybe it would be called an invalid argument. For example, if I say all students are intelligent, Mr. X is a student. Now these two premises have linked together. They are talking, both are talking about students. So all students are intelligent. Mr. X is a student. And then I say, therefore, uh, it is a nice day today. Now, although this argument has two premises and a conclusion, it is more than one propositions. It is composed of propositions. It has a structure of proposition of an argument. But the only thing lacking is the link, because the two premises are saying something else while the conclusion drawn is entirely different. When I say all men are mortal, Mr. X is a man, therefore Mr. X is intelligent. Again, it fulfills all the criteria of an argument, but there is no inference. The conclusion drawn is not on the basis of the premises, the evidence or the support provided by the premises. So the premises are saying something else, the conclusion is saying something else. That means there is a missing link. There is nothing common in conclusion and the premises. So this argument is not a valid argument. Uh, the detail
सर
of
ये आर्गुमेंट और
just hang on a second. Let me
सर ये
conclude this.
आर्गुमेंट
The detail of this
सर ये
topic of
आर्गुमेंट और सिलोजिज्म के
argument.
दरमियान फिर क्या फर्क है?
Just let me finish this, Tabish. I'll get back to you. Because now this topic of argument is explained in the introduction to logic by Copy and a concise introduction to logic by Hurley. Also, I have provided you with the PDF form of notes, and it is explained in that in great detail. So now, Tabish, sorry, now you can proceed. What you wanted to ask? Hello. हेलो।
यस सर जी, आपकी आवाज आ रही है?
जी जी ताबिश, आप क्या पूछ रहे थे?
सर ये सिलोजिज्म और आर्गुमेंट के दरमियान फिर क्या फर्क होता है? सिलोजिज्म भी हम
यस।
इसे ही कहते हैं कि उसमें
इस
प्रीमिसेस होता है, फर्स्ट प्रीमिसेस, सेकंड प्रीमिसेस, और फिर उससे जो है ना हम कंक्लूजन जाए।
जी जी, थैंक यू ताबिश। इट्स अ गुड क्वेश्चन। लेकिन प्रॉब्लम ये है कि बाकी स्टूडेंट्स ने शायद अभी तक सिलोजिज्म तक हम चूंकि पहुंचे नहीं हैं, तो इसलिए उनको शायद आइडिया ना हो सिलोजिज्म क्या है। ब्रीफली आपको ये बता दूं कि syllogism is also an argument, but it is a kind of argument. Today we are discussing argument in general, and then after this we will switch to other kind of the kinds of arguments in which there is inductive argument and deductive argument. Syllogism is a kind of deductive argument which has only three uh, propositions. There are two premises and one conclusion. So syllogism is that particular argument which has only three propositions, and that is a particular kind of an argument. Today we are discussing generally what does argument mean. So it could be an inductive argument, it could be a deductive argument, it could have three propositions in it, then it would be a syllogistic argument. If it has more than uh, three propositions, it is general argument. If it starts from the particular and ends on a general conclusion, that would be inductive argument. If it starts from a general class and the conclusion is particular, that is called deductive argument. But we are going to talk about different kinds of arguments on a later stage. Today, we just wanted to discuss what does argument generally mean, and what are the key requirements of an argument. So it's a structured group of propositions which reflect an inference. It must be made of propositions. It must have more than one proposition. There must be a structure in this argument, which means there must be at least one premise and one conclusion. And then uh, it must reflect inference. Inference means that all the propositions must have a link in between them. It's not like a mere collection of different propositions would never be an argument. The argument basic requirement is these propositions must have a link in between them. If there is no link, for example, if I say all students are intelligent and today is Wednesday, therefore Mr. X is intelligent. Although the first premise and the conclusion have a link, but there is a missing link between the second proposition does not reflect any inference or any kind of link between these propositions. So it would be invalid argument. So the valid argument must have more than one propositions. There must be a kind of a structure in that, and then there must be some kind of link or a cement. Then it would be called an argument, or it would be called a wall. If we lay bricks in a kind of structured collection of bricks which has cement in it, then we call a wall. Similarly, if there are more than one propositions, a group of proposition which have structure, a structure means a premise and conclusion, and then it must have a link, it must have inference. The proposition, the sorry, the conclusion must be drawn from these premises. Whatever premises are saying, that would be the basically the conclusion must reflect that. In a political terms, if we ask some representatives of the government that uh, what is your progress, and instead of answering that question, they would say that the previous government has done this and this and this. So that's clear example of missing link. I mean, an argument has to prove something, and in order to prove it must have some support in the back.
थैंक यू सर, बस अब क्लियर हो गया है।
ओके डियर स्टूडेंट्स, अगर किसी और का कोई सवाल हो तो प्लीज पूछ लें, वरना हम आज का लेक्चर वाइंड अप करते हैं।